Hi, my name's Adam Fletcher, and for this, the sixth installment of my series regarding re-envisioning the roles of young people throughout society, I want to explore some of the essential terms that are within this conversation. Defining a common terminology is important for any emerging field of work in society, and this is particularly true with regard to re-envisioning the roles of young people throughout society. There's been a series of words and different terms that have been thrown around, and I'm going to bring some kind of common definitions out there so that we have a new language that we can speak in common, that we can share in order to build upon this idea. Let's start. The first term that I want to throw out is youth voice. I define youth voice as any expression that young people themselves share regarding their ideas, knowledge, attitudes, actions, opinions, or different forms of expression. The second term is youth engagement. Youth engagement is the emotional connection that young people make with a particular circumstance, idea, knowledge, or other things that they might attach to, but it's an emotional connection. The third term is youth rights. Youth rights is the idea that young people have inalienable rights simply because they are young people in our society. The United Nations has best grabbed onto this idea with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The next term that I want to explore is youth empowerment. Youth empowerment is a tricky term because it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. In the 1960s and 70s, my research has shown me that during that time period, youth empowerment was best captured by an analogy of the 16-year-old and the keys to the car. We wouldn't give the keys to the car to the 16-year-old and teach them how to drive, expect them to teach themselves how to drive, and then live through it. Unfortunately, we do that with youth engagement activities all of the time. We hand over the reins and we say, do what's best for you. Do what works for you. Unfortunately, we cohabitate our society with young people as adults. So this notion of youth empowerment isn't necessarily true. I define youth empowerment as the sharing of power, the distribution of power with young people because they are young, but with the knowledge that we as adults have a responsibility inside of that as well. The next term that I want to throw out there is youth involvement. Youth involvement is the systemic and intentional engagement of young people throughout systems throughout our society. This could be businesses, government organizations, youth-serving nonprofits, schools, or other institutions, as well as families and community groups. The next term is youth service. Youth service provides young people an opportunity to serve the greater good beyond them. Dr. King explored this extensively with the notion that a man's life is not worth living until he has learned to live for other people. I believe that this is equally as true as for young people, that they need to learn to serve beyond themselves. This also ties together with the next term, which is service learning. Service learning is the intentional connection of community service opportunities with learning goals. Unfortunately, we often think that only young people can benefit from service learning, when in reality we know that adults can as well. But service learning is an important term inside of this vocabulary. The next set of terms that I'm going to explore are seen as negative by some people. I don't think they are. I think they provide a different way of looking at the circumstances that we're dealt every single day. The first term is adultism. Adultism is any time that the opinions, ideas, action, or knowledge of adults is favored over that of young people simply because they are young. So it's basically biased towards adults on behalf of adults and against young people by adults. Adultism can be perpetuated by young people. It can be perpetuated by adults. It can be systemic, cultural, or attitudinal. I'll explore those in another webcast. But for right now, understand that adultism is discrimination against youth, essentially. Adult-centrism is the egotism of adults that's expressed throughout our society. It's believing that the world revolves around us simply because we are adults. And then on the flip side of that is adultocracy, which is the rulership of adults over society simply because we're adults. This is the majority of every institution in our society. The final term that I want to share in this little piece is ephobophobia. Ephobophobia is the fear of children, and it's related to pediophobia, which is the fear of children. Ephobophobia is the fear of youth. Pediophobia is the fear of children. You can find articles that I wrote about both of those topics on Wikipedia. The final terms that I want to explore are being introduced into the field currently. The first one is intergenerational partnerships. Intergenerational partnerships is the concept that beyond generations, which are very regimented and people like Strauss and Lowe have expanded on quite a bit, beyond those can form partnerships, real allyship between young people and adults for the purpose of improving society and creating better relationships. Intergenerational partnerships are best expressed historically through the term youth-adult partnerships, which really kind of isolates the experience between youth and adults, when I think that the partnerships can span all the way down to childhood, and they can be between children and youth. They could be between children and seniors. They could be between seniors and adults who are my age and above. But intergenerational partnerships span all of those different relationships. The next term that I want to share is intergenerational equity. This term has been used extensively in economics and the environmental movement to encourage people to see the effects of the generations on each other. So acknowledging that historically, previous generations have affected the current generation, and that the current generation will affect the future generations. It's a web that's woven, and I believe that it's a web of awareness that should be brought into our work around re-envisioning the roles of young people throughout society. The last term that I want to introduce here is youth mainstreaming. It's a term that's gaining popularity in the United Kingdom and all throughout Europe that really emphasizes the notion that young people have been historically discriminated against and segregated from mainstream adult populations. Youth mainstreaming promotes the idea that young people should be integrated back into those populations, and that rather than having an adultocracy that relies on young people being segregated and separated from adults, young people should be integrated throughout all of our different functions in our society. I think that's ultimately the goal of this work of re-envisioning the roles of young people throughout society. That's it for this webcast. Catch me next time when I explore another concept essential to this work. You can learn more about me and my work at www.bicyclingfish.com. Thanks and have a great day. Peace.